Picture being asleep inside your own house when, without warning, FBI agents force their way through the front door, deploy flashbang devices, and remove your family at gunpoint. Then, moments later, they discover they entered the wrong residence. Now imagine that, instead of offering an apology, the government argues that the agents had authority to make those decisions and therefore cannot be held responsible. That situation is not hypothetical. The dispute reached the United States Supreme Court, where the Martin family secured a unanimous 9-0 victory. Now, a new development has emerged. A federal appeals court has released a fresh decision concerning government immunity. The family involved in this case has informed the 11th Circuit that the latest ruling provides additional support for their position, that the FBI should not avoid responsibility for raiding the wrong home. The government's position remains unchanged. It continues to argue that it cannot be held liable. The case traces back to 2017, when FBI personnel carried out a raid before sunrise in a suburban area near Atlanta. Rather than traveling directly to the residence listed on the warrant, one agent relied on a personal GPS device, reportedly an iPhone. According to the agent, the navigation system directed him to an incorrect location. Instead of arriving at the address specified in the warrant, the team reached the home of Katrina Martin. She lived there with her boyfriend and their 7-year-old son. When the agents arrived, they did not provide advance notice. They broke through the front entrance, detonated flashbang grenades inside the residence, and confronted the occupants. Katrina Martin and her boyfriend were hiding in a closet with a shotgun when agents located them. Officers removed them from the closet, brought out the 7-year-old child, placed the adults in handcuffs, and detained the family while firearms were pointed at them. Katrina Martin was also pulled from the residence while only partially clothed. After the family had been detained, agents conducted a brief search of the property. During that process, one officer observed mail sitting on a coffee table. The address on the mail did not match the address listed on the warrant. At that point, the agents realized a major mistake had occurred. They had entered and searched the wrong home. The officers released the family and proceeded to the correct location. They informed the residents that they would return later to explain what had happened. The intended target was only about 3 houses away, across a nearby cross street, roughly a block from the Martin residence. The agents then carried out the operation at the proper address. Following the incident, the family filed a lawsuit against both the government and the FBI. Their legal action was brought under the Federal Tort Claims Act, commonly known as the FTCA. In response, the government asserted that it was protected by immunity through the discretionary function exception contained within the FTCA. Based on that argument, government attorneys maintained that the lawsuit should be dismissed. In the earlier stages of the litigation, the lower court ruled in favor of the federal government and the Department of Justice. The dispute eventually reached the United States Supreme Court. After reviewing the matter, the justices rejected the federal government's position. In a unanimous 9-0 decision, the Supreme Court emphasized a key principle. Government immunity does not arise automatically simply because law enforcement officers exercise judgment. Federal officials must demonstrate that their actions were tied to genuine policy-based considerations rather than simple errors. As a result, the Supreme Court returned the case to the 11th Circuit. The lower court was instructed to conduct a new review, reconsider the facts, and apply the proper legal framework. Following that directive, the 11th Circuit heard the case again. During the oral arguments, one issue surfaced repeatedly. The judges focused on identifying the boundary between decisions protected as policy choices and ordinary mistakes that may amount to negligence. Throughout the proceeding, members of the court repeatedly questioned federal attorneys. They asked how carrying out a warrant at the wrong residence could be treated as a protected policy determination. The panel appeared troubled by the implications of the government's argument. Under that theory, nearly any error committed during a law enforcement operation could potentially be labeled a discretionary judgment, and therefore remain protected from liability. Several judges also pressed government lawyers on another point. They wanted to know how the current federal position aligned with the guidance the Supreme Court had just provided in its unanimous ruling. The 11th Circuit is once again examining the dispute and is expected to issue another decision on the matter. At the same time, a new development has entered the case. The Martin family recently submitted supplemental authority to the 11th Circuit. Their filing points to a fresh ruling from the 5th Circuit in a case known as Morris versus the United States. What makes the Morris decision significant is that it addresses nearly the same legal question that appears central to the Martin litigation. The issue is whether government employees remain immune from liability when they negligently perform an operation after first making a discretionary decision. That distinction carries major importance here. No party is disputing that law enforcement personnel make discretionary choices. The real question concerns what happens after those choices are made. What occurs when officials carry out those decisions improperly? What happens when an error crosses into negligence? According to the Martin family's submission, the 5th Circuit recognized a significant difference between making a policy decision and implementing that decision. The court explained that a discretionary choice by government officials does not automatically provide immunity whenever a later mistake takes place. Put another way, selecting a particular course of action may involve discretion. Failing in the execution of that decision is a separate matter entirely. That is the precise issue now at the center of the Martin case. The federal government, however, is not accepting the argument that the Morris ruling automatically strengthens the Martin family's position. The Department of Justice maintains that the two cases are fundamentally different, and that the Morris decision should not control the outcome here. According to the government's argument, Morris concerned negligent execution occurring only after a policy determination had already been made. The federal government maintains that the Martin case should not be treated the same way. According to its position, the actions being challenged are inseparable from the planning, operational decisions, and law enforcement judgment involved in carrying out the raid. The government argues that these elements were connected from the outset and must be evaluated as a single operation. Under that view, the events cannot be separated into individual decisions and examined one piece at a time. The Department of Justice also warns that if courts begin re-examining those types of operational judgments, nearly every law enforcement action could become the subject of civil liability claims. That concern remains at the center of the government's argument before the 11th Circuit. For that reason, the DOJ is urging the court not to interpret the Morris decision as broadly as the Martin family does. Ultimately, the government wants the 11th Circuit to decline reliance on that recent 5th Circuit ruling. It is important to note that the Morris decision from the 5th Circuit does not control the 11th Circuit. The court is not required to follow it. Instead, the ruling serves only as persuasive authority. At the same time, many of the legal principles involved are closely related. That is why the Martin family is presenting the decision as support for its position and as additional evidence that its claims should prevail. The family already secured a unanimous 9-0 Supreme Court ruling that rejected the government's expansive view of immunity. During the recent oral arguments, several members of the 11th Circuit also appeared doubtful of multiple DOJ arguments. Now the plaintiffs have introduced another federal appellate court decision that they believe strengthens their case. The Department of Justice disagrees. Federal attorneys contend that the ruling does not apply to the Martin dispute, carries no binding authority, and should be rejected by the court. As a result, the litigation continues to move forward. The Supreme Court has already ruled unanimously in favor of the family and against the government's original legal theory. The 11th Circuit has since reheard the matter. The Martin family has now placed a newly issued federal appellate ruling before that court in an effort to influence the decision that remains pending. The central issue has not changed. The question is whether a meaningful distinction exists between exercising discretion and carrying out that decision in a negligent manner. At its core, the dispute still asks the same thing. Can the federal government invoke immunity when agents enter and raid the wrong residence? And when officers go to an incorrect address or location despite possessing a warrant, does that qualify as a discretionary function protected from liability? Those questions now remain before the 11th Circuit as it prepares its next ruling in Martin versus United States. If you found this report informative, share it with others who follow legal, constitutional, and government accountability issues. Stay engaged, stay informed, and continue following future developments in this case.